Welcome to Fundamentals of Sponsored Projects at CSU series. In this hour, we're going to feature Budgets Part 2. So not sure if you went to Budgets Part 1. I'm kind of assuming a good portion of the people who have joined us today did, but today it's Part 2. And I am Shannon Irie. I am your moderator for this session, and I am one of the training and information coordinators at the Office of Sponsored Programs. And during the interactive portions, though, we invite you to unmute and to use your video as you feel comfortable. It's always great to see people's faces while you present. So that is why Kat and I, when we are doing this, always keep our videos on for our people who are presenting. We also have made some interactive worksheets for each of the sessions, and you can access those by going to the OSP training website, and it's under Fundamentals. The worksheet is something that we will be using throughout this presentation, so if you can get that up on your screen, that'd be great. And we will be giving you some hints about when things need to go in there. But the worksheets are also going to be used for homework, for something for you to do on your own. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. And we have Liza and Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Harvey. I started at CSU 15 years ago as an administrative assistant, and then I moved into the RA role, and now I am a subaward administrator.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Liza Hun. I am the Director of Pre-Award Support in the College of Engineering. My background in research administration started as a research associate, so I had some research administrator responsibilities as a research associate. So that was the area that I came from, and then left for a little bit, came back and started doing just pre-award. So it's been, I don't know, over 15 years of having pre-award responsibilities, and I am currently also doing a little bit of post-award responsibilities. Well, we're happy to have all of you joining us today, so thank you for being here. We're trying to continue to show you this award life cycle, and this is with the continuation of the budget presentation. This is just where we are in the life cycle. So the next slide is what we're going to do today. We're going to be talking about participant support, subawards, cost share, budget justifications, and sponsor nuances.
If you do not have the annotate, you can put into the chat about where it is that you are feeling confident and where you have more questions. So, and we'll see where people are landing.
This is good. This is going to help us decide where we need to concentrate a little bit more on.
I love the one, somebody who put a fire in participant support. I'm not sure if that's you're on fire or the whole category itself is on fire for you.
Burn participants. No, kidding.
Burn it to the ground.
This is good.
Not sure where we're at on that one.
It's got a little mixed bag there. More questions with subawards, definitely cost share.
Yeah.
And sponsor nuances. I'm hearing ya. We're hearing ya.
So it looks like it's pretty evenly distributed with question marks.
For sure.
And looking like a lot of people are feeling pretty confident about those budget justifications.
I know, it's very positive. So
that is positive.
This is great.
Yep.
Thank you very much, everybody. So we'll go ahead and start talking about some of the other budgeting considerations, and this is a continuation of Tuesday's presentation. The first is the next slide is salary cap. So salary cap is a congressional limit on how much can be paid on grants. And when we're talking about the salary limit, we're not talking about what is actually budgeted on a budget. It's based on the institutional base salary, or IBS. So I wanted to make sure everybody had that as an understanding. There's a lot of different entities, and there was a discussion That was just yesterday. Boy, yesterday seems like a long time ago. And Kira had a presentation yesterday during the lunch hour, and they're talking about all the different federal entities that had caps. And the one I hit most, that we see most in engineering, is NIH. So that's the example that I'm going to talk about. I did ask our OSP team to speak with the other RAs on this issue, because I wanted to know how much of what happens on campus is similar or different. And because I got a mixed bag, I'm going to do what I call the longer explanation. So NIH guidance associated with calculating salary cap is, or calculating salary, is to budget at actual salary. So IBS, institutional base salary, times effort. That is NIH guidance. There are units on campus that budget at actual, where at funding, NIH will look at the current salary cap and make adjustments to only fund at the cap. Let me talk about why we in engineering and some other units do not do that. We find that if you budget at actual, because the overall dollar that you get awarded is not going to change based on the salary cap. If the cap goes up, you have less dollars to pay for any of those key personnel, likely your PI, that would have salary above the cap, to pay for their effort. In addition, you would probably have less direct costs to pay for your other direct costs that are budgeted. So again, that's one way of budgeting at actual. In engineering, and again, other units budget at the cap. And what we mean is you take institutional base salary, budget at the level, and then you would have another document that is the difference between the cap and the actual, and you'd budget that separately. And I can explain that. So in the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. That was a mouthful, but this I'm hoping will make sense. For the ease of this discussion, while many that fall into the category of over the cap is likely 9 months, we're just going to use a 12-month base for the discussion. So if the current salary cap effective the beginning of the year, January 1st, is $221,000, $221,900. And if you say you had a PI with a 12-month institutional base salary, IBS, at $225,000, the difference between institutional base salary and the cap is $3,100. So what would happen is if you budget at the cap, you would budget in your submitted budget, what gets submitted, reviewed and approved, and part of submission with OSP would be the 10%. And if you wanted to understand the rest of the calculations, you would have benefits, indirect, all the way down. So when you look at what you would be over the cap, that would be the amount, say, a department would have to cover. In this case, in this example, it would be $310. That's a lot. I wanted to show the next slide. Thank you. So in KR, best practices, if you're doing this, is you would have your submitted budget. The version 1 would be what becomes your budget that would be reviewed and approved and would be marked for submission, is to have a second budget in KR that you would identify as a non-reportable cost share for the salary cap. And you would use that, the base that you would use for over the cap would be the $3,100. Okay, so that was a lot. So I'm going to just open it up for questions or comments in the chat.
Well, just a comment is, and something that they really talked about yesterday and in Kura as well, is that I think sometimes people get confused that when these entities have a salary cap, it means that we can't pay them their institutional base salary. and that is untrue. They are two different things. So we don't ask our PIs or our co-PIs or whoever is over cap to reduce the money that we pay them. We just have to come up with another source of funds in order to pay what is over cap when it is awarded.
100%. Io has a question. What if you're using person months? Okay, in the example, the previous slide, Shannon.
Do you want me to go back? Okay.
Just one, just so we can make sure it's clear. Yes, so in KR, you actually put a percentage in. But if you're working on person months, that would be the equivalent of 1.2 months. Same thing. Okay, good. Any other questions? All right, something a little easier. Tuition. One more slide, please. Tuition is, and mandatory fees, these are costs that are charged to the graduate student per credit. Good things to know is that resident tuition and mandatory fees are charged to sponsored projects. It is good for you to follow up with the unit if you're working cross-departmentally, you know, to follow up with the other unit on what their tuition costs. There might be tuition, differential tuition that may be in play, or other costs associated with having a GRA from a different unit. So take a look. KRPD automatically inflates tuition at 8. We keep a separate calculator. I'm sure all the different units do. Fees can increase by 3%, the regular amount. So, and every unit is doing this slightly differently. So take a look. Required fees are the general university technology fee, university facility fee, and university alternative transportation fee. Any questions on this? Cool beans. All right. Modular budgets is something else NIH does for requests of direct costs up to $250,000. And they are requested in modules of or increments of $25,000. What is nice about modular budgets is when you are working within, say, Workspace, if that's what you're using, you do not have to have a detailed budget nor a detailed budget justification in Workspace or however you're submitting it in. You will need a personnel justification. If you have a subaward, you'll need a consortium justification. If you have different numbers of modules across the years, with the exception of R21, you will need to justify why you may have an additional module in any one specific year. And there's the place in the additional narrative where you need to talk about what is not included in the indirect cost base. So that's where you want to have that as well. And new is the data management and sharing plan information in there. Okay. With that, internally, all the different teams, RAs, agree that best practice is that you need a budget, a detailed budget, and a detailed budget justification internally that needs to be reviewed and approved by OSP associated with this, even though NIH doesn't require it.
Or any other sponsor. I mean, there's other sponsors that don't require it too, but yeah.
So Abby has a question, and I may have missed it, but when would I use a modular budget? I have never heard of it before.
Okay, NIH, I don't know who else uses a modular budget. I'm only familiar with modular budgets for NIH proposals. National Institute of Health is NIH, and it's for when your direct costs are no more for the entire project, $250,000, just a direct cost total. So that's where it comes from. Oh, look at that. Thank you, Jen.
Yep, Jen has put a nice link to NIH for more information about modular budgets. Ooh, and a decision tree. We're so
Awesome.
fancy.
Okay, so the next slide is something that sometimes confuses even me. I always have to even go back. Okay, wait, how do we do this again? If you have a subaward, when you working on, all of your totals, you you do not count the indirect as your direct costs within the modules. So that little highlighted part is important. So you have your direct costs, if you have a sub, that's part of the different module calculation, but the indirect costs goes in this line outside of it. It's still part of our overall direct costs, but it's not included in that module number. So I like to stick that in there just to make it clear as far as where does the numbers go, because it's a little different working on a modular.
And it's also good to see that just because of language, that NIH calls a subaward a consortium, and they are really the only sponsor that uses that term. So if you see one consortium, don't be confused. That's what it is.
Okay, thank you. That's excellent thing to share. Multi-year budget considerations. Include inflation in KR. It's set. The default is 3%. So include it when you depending if you auto calculate, if you can include it, include inflation. Publications, budget per uniform guidance to CFR subsection 200.461. Uniform guidance say you're supposed to have publication costs in the final year so that it is known that those costs are associated with the current project. However, if you have a PI that is requesting to have publication costs in earlier years, per uniform guidance, there needs to be extra justification on why you need publications in earlier years. If you have something large, like salary, because of promotions or something, calculate it. Make sure you account for that because that's pretty significant. I just did one. And you can do it in KR. It is possible to have two line items. One is the assistant line, one is the associate line for promotion and tenure with the anticipated, or should I take that back, with the effective date in KR set. So it's definitely something you can do to multiply the effort accordingly so you have the right calculation. So KR can do that. And consider carry forward as budgeting annually appropriately, especially if carry forward is not allowed. So that's definitely something to consider. Okay, I'm going to stop. Questions before I move on to participant support.
To the big one. The one thing is when people are changing salary because of anticipated increases or salary adjustments, this is one time when we would recommend not using IBS, but you will need to put extra justification again why you are using these numbers for our sponsors, because it is our policy that we will always use IBS, which is institutional based salary, when figuring our budgets. So just keep that in mind, that you always want to make sure if you're going against a policy or doing something a little different that you might have to put some extra justification.
Participant support costs.
I feel like we need music for this one, like dun dun dun.
It's okay. It's okay. We're going to start off with a nice little definition. Participant support costs. Okay, I don't want to read this to you. There's 4 different categories: your stipends, travel, subsistence, and other. Bottom line with participant support, it must directly benefit the participant versus the proposed project. I mean, it can't. You understand? It's got to directly benefit the participant. So a great example is something like REU or, that sort of thing. The REU research experience
for
undergraduates. Thank you so much. So is it participant support? Sylvia is a student employed on campus in the bookstore. She is also contacted about being a participant in an environmental sciences conference related to an NSF grant. Can she be paid as a participant?
In the chat, if you would use the little emojis, if you would do either a thumbs up or a thumbs down about whether or not can Sylvia be a participant in this case? And by the way, we gave you a tricky one to begin with. Okay, so we're getting some people answering. So we got yes, but not as an employee. Travel covered for conference with a question mark. We got a thumbs up. We've got a yes. Then we've got a yes. She can travel for the conference, but she can't be paid bookstore salary. Matt has a thumbs up. Oh, we're getting some thumbs up on the screen as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can use the react buttons as well.
All right.
Okay.
Well, yes. I don't think I saw anything that I disagreed with. The answer is yes. The big question is this participant paid on the project? Yes, Sylvia is an employee, but is Sylvia an employee on this project? And in this case, Sylvia is not. So yes, Sylvia can be a participant in the Environmental Sciences Conference. And to go specifically to some of the things that were said, travel, I guess it depends, because I guess that we don't have enough information if travel costs are associated. But yeah, again, participant support is not, it is also not an employee thing, right? It's a stipend, and sometimes it is construed as kind of the same thing, and yet it's not. So,
Right.
yes.
Some sponsors don't allow travel, so that's also something to keep in mind too, is the sponsor guidelines on travel.
Yeah. So I think what people are also referring to here is that while she is a participant during this, and if she's being paid a stipend from this project, she should not be receiving her hourly salary on top of it, because she's obviously not working during those hours. So,
Oh, well, yes, that is a
so
true
that would be a
statement.
double dip. So,
Absolutely.
I think that's what you were asking, Io. Did I answer your question?
I think so. Sometimes in an effort to compensate a participant, the thought crosses the mind that we could just use an hourly assignment. But having that salary on that participant support grant is troublesome.
Yes.
And so I think that's what I was driving at.
Yeah. Generally, participants are going to be paid via a stipend, and that goes through purchasing and goes through procurement, as opposed to going through our HR system. So it's very different.
And Jen has a great comment she made
Yeah.
too in the chat.
Yeah, they can't be employees necessarily while we're paying them a stipend. But that doesn't mean that they can't be a CSU employee that's paid in a completely different area or a different experience. So we've even had employees, who are GRAs, who have been allowed to participate in conferences that are held on campus and be a participant. So those are kind of some specialized cases. So we need to look at those on a case-by-case basis.
Yes. It's good if somehow there's a question, you're budgeting it, speak with your OSP team, see if they can give you some better guidance about if there's more clarification or something you need to add in the justification to make it clear what you're requesting. Okay, something fun. The next slide.
Julie had one more question.
Sorry.
It said, and then there are incentives to participate in a study, but it's not participant support, because that's true. Incentives to be part of a study or a program are not participant support.
Right. And we will cover that. But thank you. I appreciate that, Julie. In here, if you wouldn't mind putting on chat, different examples of things that are not participant support. So you were so ahead of the game, Julie. Yeah, facility rental. That would be more of something that's a benefit to the project. Speaker for stipends. Speaker stipends or travel. Right. That would be under other direct costs. Food to feed facilitators,
Yeah, and IO put in employee travel. Now remember, again, if that person is an employee of that project, we would not be able to pay for travel, but there is a potential that if that person is not working on that project, but is an actual participant, we might be able to pay for the travel.
I know, it's like we're trying not to confuse you, but there's always
It depends.
An exception.
Yeah, there is an exception for that. And so we need to be careful on that one. But yes, speaker stipends and travel. Yeah. Food that would feed the facilitators.
Exactly.
Yeah, food gets to be really weird on these because we can include food and subsistence for the participants, but then we also have to be careful not to be paying them per diem and paying for food at the same time, because that's also a double dip. So participant support takes a lot of thought when you're doing it, making sure that what you're covering is correct.
If the project, I'm reading Kim's, if a project is hosting a conference for participants, why is the facility rental not an allowable expense on the participant? Because that doesn't directly benefit a specific participant. That is more, that's a conference cost.
Yeah, it's a
So
benefit
I
to the
see that
project,
goes
but
under,
yeah.
right, the project. It goes under other direct costs, not participant support.
And it might be allowable on the project, but as other direct costs, something that would bear in indirect costs.
You're
And
welcome.
again, all these other things that we're talking about. So the speakers, we might be able to pay for their travel. We might be able to pay for their hotel and some per diem for them, but that's going to be under other direct costs because they're not participants.
Right.
Did we miss anything on our
I
notes
don't
here?
know, it was pretty
So-
good.
Mileage. Julie had mentioned mileage for CSU employees.
Oh, sorry, let's see.
Yeah.
Yes. Mileage for CSU employees who are renting vehicles for yeah,
And again-
that's project, that's not participant. You can identify it where it benefits a specific participant. So I consider that more project costs.
And then again, we have the human subject incentive payments, which are not participants. So,
Right.
Great.
So best practices, we just said, don't confuse them with human subjects incentives. Something to ensure is that when you do budget, just cover all the needs that you need for each participant. But most importantly, I would like to say is don't over budget in this category, because for almost all sponsors, it requires approval to move funds out of the participant support category. It's a lot easier to move costs into the participant support category than out of. So try to budget accordingly within that category. That's it for there. Any more questions?
Okay, so we've got a little check-in here. Have we said any acronyms that people aren't understanding? Are there any other questions about participant support? I know that there were some questions in the last one, some specific questions about participant support. Is there anything we can clarify?
So in the past with some participant support, my group has used like broader agreements saying like, so we'll give a stipend and, like cover airfare or hotel or something like that. But we work with like the event organizers and then they actually deal with that. Is that still reasonable practice or?
Every unit, Matt, does things a little bit differently.
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways to do things correctly. And unfortunately, there's a lot of ways to do things incorrectly. So I would say if it's working for your unit and you haven't been flagged, then it's still an okay practice.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was like specifically outlined in one of our grants with not NASA, but one of the larger award folks. So yeah, and just it worked there, so we kept using it.
And the sponsors are usually pretty good that if you budget something in that participant support that they don't agree with, they will change your budget or they'll ask you to make a change. So in particular, like the NSFs of the world. And if you want a really good definition of participant support that doesn't come just from uniform guidance, I'm going to suggest to go to the NSF PAP guide.
Yeah, I think I definitely read that one. So
yeah, and NSF has the best definition of participant support, and other sponsors like NIH follow that same definition, as do a lot of the large like DOE, and I mean Department of Energy not necessarily Department of Ed, because sometimes they're a little different. NASA, you know, some of the others. So,
Awesome.
but again,
Thank you.
if you have it in the proposal and it is awarded with those dollars in there, then it's generally an okay thing, because they are looking at participant support.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, we're gonna move on
Sounds
to Julie.
Subrecipients. Here are some handy dandy points to consider whether or not it's a subrecipient or a contractor or vendor. And a lot of times we have to rely on the PI to tell us if it's a subrecipient or a contractor. But the big thing with subrecipients is that the subrecipient has a big role in the decision making for the whole project. They have PIs or co-PIs. Publishing is a huge thing. If they're publishing, they're considered a subrecipient. They may have to provide cost share, and they may be involved in the design of the project, where a contractor or vendor is sometimes just providing a goods or a service. Generally, that's what they would do in their day-to-day operation. That's not something special they would just do for our project. And they don't participate in the design of the project or in the proposal, deciding what we're going to do in the project. And they provide tools essential to services. So once you determine if a subrecipient is going to be a subrecipient, we need from the subrecipient a statement of work, a detailed budget justification. Whether or not the sponsor needs it does not matter. We need a detailed budget justification for invoicing purposes and for subrecipient monitoring, and for the PI to determine if the charges being made are what they had originally agreed on in the agreement. And then we also need a commitment letter from the subrecipient. Most cases, the subrecipient's entire budget, direct and indirect costs, is considered a direct cost to the pass-through entity, PTE, and should be budgeted under other direct costs. However, it's also a good idea to get a copy of their NICRA, or negotiated indirect rate cost agreement, because if we use the incorrect F&A rate, it does affect their budget. So it's important to determine the correct rate, as subawards amounts exceeding 25K do not incur F&A. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Another thing, just to bring it up, because I did see that there were some questions about this, is that currently uniform guidance has that only the first 25,000 of a subaward is included in most NICRAs, and that's the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. But there is a high possibility that the changes to uniform guidance that are coming out this spring could bump that up to 50,000 or to 50K. So just FYI, we don't know exactly what that means yet, because we haven't been given any guidance yet, but that is one of the proposed changes to uniform guidance.
All right, next slide. So here's a little activity based on the current uniform guidance of 25K. Calculate what the indirect cost would be for a subaward.
You can write it on the screen, or we can put it into the chat. But what we want to know is that you want to propose a subaward to UNC for 35,000. And using the current uniform guidance and our current NICRA here at CSU, which states that we only charge on the first 20 indirect costs on the first 25,000, how much indirect costs would we be calculating for this? And we're also assuming, by the way, that this is just in year one. That's okay.
And we are also under the assumption that you are budgeting for a project after July 1st, where it is at 54%, because our current rate is still 53 until the end of June, 53.5 till the end of June.
Okay, so we got some people here putting it on the screen. We've got our 25K at 54%, so that means it's 13.5. Okay, so let's say we're changing then, and it's our new, it's going to go up to 50K. What would it be then? And we didn't practice this. I don't even know. I didn't even do the math. Well, so in this case, we would be using the entire amount and the 18.9. So as we can see, it is going to, so this is the answer for the, it said, Jenny, you want to propose a subaward to UNC. So I'm assuming that UNC is a subaward. That's how I was reading it.
Oh yeah, I should probably say with UNC.
So, but as we can see, there's going to be kind of a considerable difference between what we're going to be calculating as indirect costs when it goes up to potentially 50,000. So again, we don't know that yet.
So Jenny says if CSU is a sub to UNC, we would charge 54%.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, keep in mind that the rates change, but they're auto calculated in KR.
Yes.
And the best practice is to utilize the subaward tab in KRPD. And then there's also a quality quick guide on the OSP website.
And does anyone need any clarification about what Jenny's talking about as far as us being a sub as opposed to us having a sub on our project? But yes, when we are a sub, it doesn't matter. We would be charging 54% on our entire direct costs. Modified total direct costs, I should say.
And then if UNC were doing the budget, they would be using their rate, not ours.
Correct.
Clarification there.
Yep.
All right, next slide, I guess, right? Required for subs at the proposal stage. As of right now, there's a new requirement from NIH that is required at proposal due to this policy NOT OD 182. Foreign subrecipients must acknowledge that they understand and will comply with new requirements to provide all data, lab notebooks, data, documents, etc., related to research outcomes at least once a year to align with the RPPR submission. We also may need current and pending support and bio sketches. And if they're not foreign subs, for every sub, we need a detailed budget, a detailed justification, whether the sponsor needs it or not, CSU needs it, statement of work, which, you know, ideally would include milestones, objectives, products, and deliverables. A lot of times we get a sentence and we really need more than a sentence. The subcommit form, the FDP template, the CSU template, and then there's that new subcommit template for foreign subs. Any questions on that?
So, and this is breaking news, y'all. So you might, if you're potentially someone brand new, you have the newest information. So this is going to be coming out next week, and we're going to be talking about it more at Ramround. So. And
yay, Jenny, that's awesome. I think we should get them at proposal stage. I know a lot of people balk because it's like, well, we're not get funded. Why should we provide it? But I think we should ask for it at proposal stage. And if you're looking for more information, it's on our OSP landing webpage. There's a subaward information quick link, and there's the link at the bottom. So if you click on that link, it will show you what's needed at proposal stage, what's included when we do a risk assessment, a little bit about subaward administration and how stuff gets, to our team to issue a subaward. There's also information about subaward invoicing. Steve Crawford does that, and about subaward closeout. There's also our contact information, the form for determining whether or not it's a subaward or a vendor. There's also a copy on that link of the proposal sub recipient commitment form and the PI request to initiate a subaward, and also the FDP clearinghouse, which is that the next slide?
Yep.
So CSU participates in the FDP clearinghouse, which is a cooperative initiative between the federal granting agencies and institutions of higher education that receive federal funding. The focus of FDP is to streamline information and reduce the administrative burden associated with grants and contracts. They provide a number of mailing lists on topics such as contracts, ERA, project certification, subawards, and regulatory compliance. You can also subscribe to the FDP website for updates and announcements. Any questions on FDP? It does streamline stuff, I have to say. And just keep in mind too, if there's a sub-recipient we have not worked with before here at CSU, we have to do a risk assessment, which will slow things down a little bit until we get the documents from the subrecipient. So don't anticipate a quick turnaround like we have with a lot of the subrecipients, because we need to get information from them before we can move forward in our risk assessment, such as their financial information and that kind of stuff.
Okay, and again, checking in, acronyms, we've had FDP, we've had SOW, SOW, KRPD we've talked about, NIH, DHHS, IBS. Are any of those acronyms that people aren't understanding? Since everything that we do in research administration is an acronym. So federal
The slide
demonstration.
before, yeah.
Yeah,
The
it's
slide
federal
right before.
demonstration partnership.
There it is.
Yep. Okay. So moving on.
Okay. Take a stretch, people. We're going to talk about cost share. It's one of those things where it's it can get confusing. So what I'm going to try to do is get it so that I don't know. You let me know how well I do here if I've making it clear. In regards to cost share. Cost share is the part of your total project costs that is not covered by the sponsor. So we have monies that we are requesting of your sponsor. It's the things that still you need it in order to accomplish the proposed scope of work. So if it's not covered by the sponsor, it's the cost share piece. That's what we're talking about. It has to be tracked. If you're proposing cost share, it cannot be promised to another project. Cost share cannot be from other federal funds, and cost share needs to be on the approved budget. Those are probably the initial highlights with cost share. And we'll go to the next slide. Types of cost share. I'm going to move around this little thing. I'm not going to go truly left, right. We're just going to start on the left-hand side, which is mandatory cost share. Mandatory cost share is cost share that is required and a condition of the award. So it's stated in the solicitation, it tells you how much you need to provide, and it's very clear, it's mandatory. Okay, we're going to go on the other side. Voluntary on the right-hand side. Voluntary uncommitted. It is not required. It is voluntary. However, it is uncommitted, means we have to track it internally. However, we do not have to report it to the sponsor. So this is okay. Voluntary uncommitted. An example is 1% minimum effort. 1% minimum effort rule is each key person must have a minimum of 1% effort in each budget period in the budget. So that's what we would track. And so that's what that is. Okay, so now we're going to go to the difficult child in the middle. Voluntary committed. Voluntary committed is cost share that, again, it is not required. It is voluntary. The committed part is at the proposal stage. It's voluntary. You discuss it, you quantify it, it's in the proposal, and what happens is, even though it was voluntary, because you quantified it and you discussed it, it will become a condition of the award at the award stage. And this is highly discouraged by CSU. Yeah, highly discouraged. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about voluntary cost share a little bit. So highly discouraged at CSU. It should not impact peer review. I do not have the part of uniform guidance, but it says in uniform guidance, it does say it should not impact for federal solicitations. Have I seen it? Yes, where they say cost share is not required. However, if you provide 50% cost share, you will be given 20 points, as scoring, like it's part of the merit-based scoring. And you're like, time out, this should not happen. If you find a solicitation, a federal solicitation that says that, please give your OSP team a heads up that this is what's going on. What happens is someone in OSP will, give the heads up to COGR. COGR is the Council of, help, COGR,
Governmental relations?
dang, I don't know. Is that right? I think that's right. Okay, yes, they'll let COGR know. It's one of those things where we say, hey, someone's not playing nice in the sandbox. What actually happens, I cannot say, but we're just going to do our due diligence when we notify, we notify OSP when we find a solicitation that is doing what the federal government should not be doing as far as merit-based scoring, voluntary cost share. But again, if it's quantified in the proposal, it becomes committed cost share at award. Sometimes I see it more often with newer researchers where they feel if they promise, their startup package, that somehow their proposal looks better. It does not. So we want to make sure we keep track of that. Take a look at the budget justification, take a look at the facilities. Those are the documents that seem very scary. So take a peek, review those very well. Cost sharing 101. It has to be an allowable direct cost. If it's not allowable to the sponsor, it cannot be considered allowable on the cost share side. I didn't notice this earlier. Salary over cap is not cost share, but needs tracking. Well, okay. So salary over cap is cost share to me. And yes, it needs tracking. It's just not reported. So I don't know. Someone can correct me if that's.
It is not cost share. We do
It's not.
track it because it has to be tracked and we do report on it, but it is not actually cost share because it's an unallowable cost.
Because it's unallowable costs.
Yep.
Okay, well, that does fit the rule based on the definition, 100%. Okay, F&A can be calculated on the cost share amount, as long as it's allowable. Unrecovered indirect costs, yes, we use this often. Let's say a sponsor has a reduced maximum F&A rate that you can use on the sponsor side of your costs, and let's say it's 10%. The difference between the current budget period, let's say, is 54%. The difference in indirect costs using the different rates, as long as it's allowable, can be used on the cost share side, and that will help reduce the amount of direct costs that need to be used to cover cost share. It just has to be allowable. If it's allowable, you can totally do it.
Usually you have to get that in writing from the sponsor. So
Or-
don't assume.
No, don't assume. It's
Never
got to be
assume.
clear in the solicitation. So
Yep.
read the solicitation extremely well. And if you have some questions, contact your OSP team.
Yeah, it can't be an email from the sponsor. It has to be published in writing in the guidelines that cost share is allowed.
Quick question. What are allowable cost share budget line items? If we can stick those in the chat, if someone is brave enough to unmute and want to say.
Is everybody still awake?
I don't know, it's really hard. Okay, yes, salary is huge. We see salary used. That's probably the main thing that we see for our tenure track faculty to use. Materials and supplies. Yeah, when the sponsor has you can use that. If that's right, Matt, what we just talked about, the unrecovered, is that what you're talking about? Absolutely, you can use that as cost share. How about equipment? If you use equipment, it has to be fair market value at the time of donation, and it cannot include profit, and it has to be donated during the period performance, not prior. So that's one. That's a good one. But those are all great. So best practices, not every unit does this, but is to have your cost share forms, your documentation as part of the record for review. I'm not sure what every unit does. Engineering, we have our cost share forms as part of our budget review. If you have to discuss something that is like cost sharing, but you don't want it to be considered cost sharing, use the word leverage, leveraging the different resources, and do not quantify. If you quantify, it can be considered cost share. Next slide. I tried to create an example of some cost share calculations. The biggest calculation trouble seems to be, what are we talking about? Are we talking about cost share on the sponsor requests? Are we talking about cost share percentage based on total project cost? So I have two examples. So we'll do the left-hand side. Let's assume the sponsor request is 200,000. Cost share is 20% of the sponsor costs requested. How much is cost share? You take the sponsor request dollars, multiply that by the cost share rate, which we know in the left-hand side is 20%. So cost share in this example would be $40,000. So how much is total project cost? Total project cost is the sponsor request, which is 200K, the cost share, which is $40,000, total project cost is 240,000. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Questions? Okay, cool. Moving on. So the right-hand side, we're going to talk about cost share on total project costs. A PI comes and says, we want to request $200,000 to DOE. That's the request, what the money they're asking to come from them. Then they'll say, when we read the solicitation, it says 20% on total project costs. We're like, well, how exactly do I figure out how much total project cost is? So this is where you have to just understand where your 100% comes from. If cost share is 20%, that means the sponsor share rate is 80. So sponsor share 80, cost share 20, that's 100%. So you take the sponsor request, and in this case, it's 200,000. You divide it by the sponsor share, which is 80%. Total project costs, 250K. Then you figure out, all right, so now they got that, how much is cost share? You take your total project costs, you subtract the sponsor costs, you get 50K cost share. Questions?
And this is a really high level thing, y'all, but you have to understand that if you see cost share and you see this language, you have to know what it is that they're trying to calculate, because you don't want your cost share numbers to be off.
Yeah. Okay, I made this on one slide. So in the future, when it comes, when you're needing to do it, it's on one slide and you can get to it. So I tried to make it as concise as possible. Here's the thing, if you're reading a solicitation and it's unclear, what helps is if they have an example, read the example. That, because sometimes what they say and what they mean are two different things, or it's not totally clear. So if they have an example of what they mean when they're talking about a calculation, take a look at that. That usually gets clarified there. Okay. Moving on. 1% minimum cost share. I think I mentioned this earlier. All key personnel need to have a minimum of 1%, which is 0.12 month, assuming a 12-month budget period in each budget period of the project. If for some reason you're not requesting it from the sponsor, then it cost shared, but hopefully you can do 1% unless somehow it's not allowable. Then I get it. Then you don't put it on.
And I think, don't we not like to refer to it as cost share, but just 1% minimum effort?
Well, it's,
I don't know,
considered voluntary uncommitted.
Okay.
Is how I understand it.
Okay.
Tracked, not reported.
Okay, on to budget justifications.
So budget justifications is a description of proposed cost in the budget, and if applicable, the matching or cost sharing contributions. A budget justification is like a recipe. More information is always good. Don't leave out stuff. It's a good description of the work. It's a categorical description of proposed costs. We need to explain what's necessary and a benefit of each item requested in the budget. We need to know why it's allowable for the work that people are proposing. And we need to explain the basis for all proposed costs. Personnel salaries are calculated using the institutional based salary, sorry, IBS. Cost of equipment is based on a quote obtained by who?
Just whomever.
Whomever. Just we need a quote is what you're saying. We need a
You need to explain.
We need a quote.
Well, how are you basing the price of this equipment? Did you get a
Right.
quote from
We need
someone? Did
information,
you
right.
just buy a piece of equipment 2 months ago? You know, there has to be a basis for why you're putting that number in your budget.
Right. We need backup for that. I mean, basically, a justification is backup for, you know, some of the requests that we make. Travel per diem is based on current state approved or GSA.gov. Flights are based on recent travel like Expedia, etc. Did you use escalations or inflation and factors in out years? And a good budget justification. I mean, I'm telling you, details matter. Follow the sponsor budget categories and order and the sponsor page limits. They're usually listed on the request for proposal. Include additional items like tables, pens, things that will get paid for by the project. They need to be included in the budget justification. Exclude items.
Yeah, sometimes some sponsors ask you not to put things in. So for instance, NASA has redacted budgets that doesn't allow you to add personnel, fringe, or indirect costs for because they think that they might taint the opinion or the review process.
That's true. I forgot that. Next slide.
Yeah.
There is this video that explains budget justification, salaries, and wages. So if you have time.
Yeah, it's a little longer, so it'll be on the PowerPoint slides, or you can always Google the Incura YouTube Tuesdays and budget justifications, because they actually have more than one video out.
But it is worth watching if you have time.
Well, we're gonna look at a couple of justifications here, and we're gonna talk about whether or not they're good or not.
Perfect.
Here is a justification for the PI.
1 person months. This person is a faculty member in the Department of Science. Overall management of the research project. She recently won an award for the best teaching professor in their department in spring of 23, and she's the co-chair of the DEIJA committee. Do you guys think that's a good scope of work?
What do you think about this? Is this how's this justifying? Is this justifying whatever budget number it is, that 1 person month that we have in there?
Doesn't have any tasks, no goals, no deliverables.
Yeah, so Allie said this would be good information for the biosketch.
Definitely.
Yep.
Doesn't really say a whole lot about the project. Says a lot about her, but not about the project.
And the justification, this is also a good place to mention that the justification is not a great place to try and put additional information that is not applicable, such as things that should be in other documents, or trying to also put what the scope of work is and try, if you have gone over the page limits for a project narrative or a scope of work or a statement of work for your, this is not where it needs to go.
All right, take a read of this one and see what you think about this one.
What makes this a possibly better justification? Outlining the direct role that they're going to play in the project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The relationship that students paid on the project.
Becoming increasingly important, y'all, these mentoring activities. It's a good place to say who is going to be the mentor for these.
Yeah, ties the tasks to the scope of work.
And actually speaks to what they will be doing with their time. So between the two justifications, justification number 2 is the clear winner. Now, I will also say that just because it has more words is not the reason behind it being a clear winner. Being clear and concise is important, in particular when we have page limits. Well, everyone marked that they were rock stars at justification, so.
Oh, that's
at the
right.
beginning.
Good point.
Justifications are very important. Okay, so we have our roles and responsibilities matrix for proposal and budget development, and getting it all together. This can be found in a couple of different spots on our website. It can be found under guidance on our website as a PDF document, but it can also be found under the award lifecycle tiles on our website, which are clickable, and there is a matrix under each of those. And the roles and responsibilities is a document that was created between OSP and departmental units. So everyone looked this over and agreed to these. But if you're wondering what is your responsibility or what is not your responsibility, this is a really great place to go and look as far as who should be doing what. And again, it's done by the award lifecycle stage in a couple different places. And then we also have a roles and responsibilities for subawards.
And again, if you guys ever have any questions on subawards, Chris or I or Steve are all happy to answer questions. Just send us an email, or you can even Teams us. I like Teams too. Either way.
Special thank you to our presenters for sharing their expertise today. On behalf of the OSP Training and Professional Development Committee, we thank you for your participation in today's session.